One of the biggest surprises from the 2023 college football season was the Missouri Tigers. After many thought they'd win just 6 or 7 games in 2023, the Tigers ended up winning 11, they won the Cotton Bowl over Ohio State, and if the expanded playoff would have happened last year, they would have found themselves with a spot in it. As a Mizzou fan myself, I was shocked. I thought Elijah Drinkwitz was not going to be able to get the job done, I didn't believe in Brady Cook, and I thought Mizzou would have another 6 or 7 win season in a mediocre bowl trip. Well, I was dead wrong, and as we look forward to the 2024 season, Mizzou football is getting a ridiculous amount of hype. They're pretty much in every single preseason top 15 list. Some think Luther Burden's a top 3 draft pick, and many say that Mizzou should be almost a lock to make this year's playoff. In today's video, I want to preview the Missouri Tigers. I want to do a good chunk of previews this year on the channel, and of course the Mizzou Tigers are going to get one. We're to talk about how they did last year, how that should carry over into this season, the depth chart, important players, and at the end of the day, we're going to give a prediction as well. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and preview the 2024 Mizzou Tigers. I think in order to understand how Mizzou got to this point, we do need to go back and visit last year. I predicted the team would win 6 or 7 games, as they had a very mediocre quarterback in Brady Cook, had a couple of big names to replace, and no one really expected them to do much because Elijah Drinkwitz had the program hovering around 500. Little did we know right away, things would be a little bit different. They went out and hired Kirby Moore as an offensive coordinator and put up 35 quick points in a win over South Dakota. Sadly though, week 2, it looked like typical Mizzou. They ended up playing against Middle Tennessee, and after getting out to an early lead, they almost blew it. They only won 23-19, and luckily it wasn't like 2016 when they lost at home to the Blue Raiders. Week 3 is where everything finally changed. In a game that I was personally at, Mizzou went toe-to-toe at number 15 Kansas State, and eventually drove down the field, had a stupid penalty, and Harrison Mevis drilled one of the longest field goals in SEC history, and they ended up winning the game 30-27. This sent Mizzou into a state of pandemonium, and they were legit. After that, they would go beat Memphis and St. Louis, they'd win that game by a touchdown, and they would hop into the polls at number 23. From there, they would beat Vanderbilt 38-21, before they would be ranked number 21 in the country in a face-off matchup with number 23 LSU. In a game that went back and forth, Mizzou ended up blowing it late. After being up late, Mizzou would end up blowing it, then Brady Cook would throw a pick 6, and they lost 49-39. From there, I fully expected the wheels to fall off, as they were down 14-0 early on against Kentucky. Things looked really bad, but then they put on a clinic and won 38-21, showing that the team was different from previous squads. After that, they controlled South Carolina from start to finish in a 34-12 victory before the game of the year in the SEC East, as they would go on the road to number 2 Georgia. The game was actually close, and Mizzou had a fighting chance in the fourth quarter, but Brady Cook threw a horrendous interception to one of Georgia's defensive linemen, and from there everyone knew the game was over, and they lost 30-21. After that, they returned home to play against Joe Milton in Tennessee, and this game was awesome. They ended up winning 36-7, and Tennessee got absolutely blown out. After that, they would have Florida. Well, no one was really expecting much from the Gators. They ended up hanging around, and even though Graham Mertz got hurt, Max Brown, the backup, almost led them to a victory. Faced with a long fourth down, quarterback Brady Cook would end up finding Luther Burden on an impossible pass before Harrison Mevis would kick a game-winning field goal. Mizzou could have easily lost this game and lost their season, but they found a way to win unlike previous years, and this was my favorite game from the 2023 season. After that, they go on the road and destroy Arkansas 48-14 in the Battle Line rivalry before they would face off with number 7 Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. Before I get all the comments down below, Ohio State had a couple of opt-outs, but so did Mizzou. Some of Mizzou's best players were not playing or were injured, and the only real disadvantage Ohio State had to Mizzou was the quarterback position. Devin Brown ended up getting hurt early on, and true freshman Lincoln Kienholz would have to play, but it didn't really matter who was playing quarterback for Ohio State that day. Mizzou's defense came to play. After one of the worst first halves of a big-time bowl game I've ever seen, Mizzou ended up scoring 2 touchdowns in the second half and could have had a third but took a knee, and beat Ohio State 14-3, completely shutting out the Buckeyes. Either way, Ohio State had much more talent than Mizzou, and the only real disadvantage was the quarterback position, and the Tigers just ended up being the better team that night. Either way, Mizzou won and finished their season with an 11-1 record. This was absolutely huge for Coach Elijah Drinkwitz, and unfortunately their big-time defensive coordinator Blake Baker would leave for a huge paycheck at LSU. One of the major reasons why the Tigers had such a big season was because of a couple players who really stepped up. Brady Cook threw for 3,300 yards with 21 touchdowns and 6 picks. Cody Schrader finished as a Heisman finalist, running for 1,600 yards and 14 touchdowns. And Luther Burden became one of the best receivers in the country with 86 catches for 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns. There are also plenty of other players who are contributors, especially on the defensive end. Going into the 2024 NFL Draft, the Tigers had one of their best seasons ever as they sent Darius Robinson, a defensive end, to the first round, had Ennis Rakestraw, a corner, get drafted in the second round, Tyron Hopper, a linebacker, went in the third round, Javon Foster, an offensive tackle, went in the fourth round, Chris Abrams-Drain, a corner, went in the fifth round, Jalen Carlisle, a safety, went in the fifth round, and then a couple of guys signed as priority free agents, such as Cody Schrader and their kicker Harrison Mevis. It was absolutely a huge season for Mizzou, and there was a ton of momentum. Going into 2024, the Tigers would fill some of the holes on the defense and offense with some big-time players as both recruits and as transfers. When you take a look at their recruiting class, it finished number 21 in the country according to 24/7 Sports and was headlined by a couple of big players, including corner Jalen Greco, wide receiver Courtney Crutchfield, defensive lineman Jalen Brown, corner Jaron Sensabaugh, and of course, 5-star top 6 recruit Williams Nwaneri. This is one of the biggest pickups in school history and should be up there with Luther Burden and Dorial Green Beckham for the Tigers. In terms of their transfer portal class, they also brought in a ton of players who should have an immediate impact. They ended up grabbing 15 total players out of the portal, and I expect pretty much all of them to play right away. They grabbed one of the best offensive linemen in the country in Caden Green from Oklahoma, grabbed 2 running backs in both Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel from Georgia State and App State, a starting caliber corner from Clemson in Toriano Pride, a starting linebacker from Miami, Corey Flagg, starting defensive lineman Chris McClellan, and then a couple of other players who I expect to see the field at some point, including Zion Young, an edge rusher from Michigan State, Sterling Webb, a defensive lineman from New Mexico State, and Jeremiah Beasley, a big-time recruit from Michigan. They also totally addressed the offensive and defensive line as they grabbed edge rusher Darius Smith from Georgia, who many have been raving about, big-time offensive tackle Marcus Bryant from SMU, and also 2 starting defensive caliber players in Khalil Jacobs from South Alabama and Eddie Kelly from Georgia Tech. I know I just kind of went through the whole portal, but my goodness, Mizzou really got a ton of big names. So as we now go ahead towards their depth chart, what should this year's roster look like and who are some players to watch out for? Well, the quarterback position was very interesting. They lost 2 quarterbacks to the portal as both Jake Garcia and Jabari Johnson left. Johnson followed his former offensive coordinator, and Jake Garcia was kind of all over the place anyways. Brady Cook is going to be the starter. The third stringer is going to be their true freshman, Aiden Glover, and then the guy in second is Drew Pine. As many of you guys know, he was at one point a guy who got offered scholarships in middle school and signed to play at Notre Dame. While he was always a little bit undersized, Pine got a couple of opportunities to start for the Irish and was also battling it out last year at Arizona State. He didn't make it work, so now he's transferring to Mizzou, and he's going to be the backup unless something happens to Cook. The quarterback position is going to be great, and Mizzou's getting back to the days where they have a really good quarterback. You also have Sam Horn, who's battling an injury, and I'm worried he's never going to end up doing anything. In terms of the running back position, they will have to replace their superstar Cody Schrader, and luckily they have a couple of good options. You have both Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel, 2 running backs out of the portal, who should split time, and are both currently projected 6th round draft picks according to PFF. Both of them could be a dynamic duo, and hopefully one of them ends up taking that lead role, which I ultimately think will be Marcus Carroll. After that, you have former 4-star recruit Tavoris Jones, and redshirt freshman Jamal Roberts. I doubt any other freshmen from the 24 class get on the field. The running back right now looks like it could be a strength for them, as they're going to have a lot of depth and also a lot of potential there. I'm also extremely excited for the receiver room as they return their top 3 starters in Luther Burden, Theo Weiss Jr., and Mookie Cooper, all of which will once again start and should be dynamite type players. Luther Burden's considered a top 5 NFL draft prospect for next year, and Weiss was also a former 5-star at Oklahoma who should hear his name called once again. After that, they have a couple of big names, as Marquise Johnson was one of the best freshman receivers in the country last year, Mekhi Miller has shown flash, and they also have 2 redshirt freshmen in Daniel Blood and Josh Manning, who have significant upside, and then 2 blue-chip freshmen in Courtney Crutchfield and James Madison. This could be Missouri's best position group in the entirety of their roster, and I'm super pumped for this wide receiver room, especially Luther Burden. At tight end, things get a little bit interesting. Last year, true freshman Brett Norfleet broke out into one of the best young tight ends in the country, and he will once again return, and he'll be backed up by experienced Tyler Stevens or their redshirt freshman tight end Jordan Harris, who has unlimited potential. On the offensive line, they lost a couple of starters, but the starting five should look as follows: Marcus Bryant at left tackle, Caden Green at left guard, Connor Tollison at center, Cameron Johnson at right guard, and Armand Membo at right tackle. This is honestly one of the best offensive lines that the Tigers have ever had, and it wouldn't surprise me if all 5 of these guys find themselves in the NFL at some point. I'm kind of excited for that, and overall the offense looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. The Tigers also brought back Kirby Moore as the offensive coordinator, so the offense should be fine. The defense, though, is going to be the biggest question mark. They lost their 2-star corners in both Chris Abrams-Drain and Ennis Rakestraw to the NFL, their star linebacker Tyron Hopper to the NFL, and then obviously their defensive line superstar Darius Robinson, who was a first-round pick. On that defensive line, they'll return Christian Williams, who transferred in from Oregon a few years ago, and then Florida transfer Chris McClellan should be the other starter. You also have a couple of other names on that defensive line that could also get into the mix. At the defensive end spot, I personally think it's going to be Johnny Walker and Darius Smith, but many are saying that Zion Young has played well enough to get on the field right away. They also have former big-time recruit Joe Moore and their superstar true freshman Williams Winery. I'm really excited for this defensive end group, and while Johnny Walker's probably the biggest name there right now, all 4 of those other options are someone to keep an eye on. The linebacker spot's going to be interesting, as they do return 2 starters in Chuck Hicks and Tristan Newsome, who broke out late, and that other spot will have to be filled by either Corey Flagg or Jeremiah Beasley. I'm kind of a little bit worried about the linebacker spot, but not too concerned. At the corner spots, they returned Drayden Norwood, who started a couple games last year, and then obviously brought in Clemson transfer Toriano Pride. After that, you'll have Shamar McNeil, who showed flash late last year, Marcus Clark, a former transfer as well, and then former blue chip recruit Jamarion Wayne should also get a chance to see the field. Norwood and Pride are going to be those 2 guys, and hopefully they can help fill the void that Rakestraw and Abrams-Drain left. Looking over to the final 2 spots on the roster, the Tigers will run 3 safeties, as the first one will be Joseph Charleston, who's been a starter for a couple of years now. The second one will be Marvin Burks Jr., who was a huge recruit out of high school and has played a little bit so far. And the third one will be Dalen Carnell, who's the best player on the defense. Carnell's been going under the radar for a couple of years now, and many project him to be the breakout star of Mizzou's defense in 2023, and hopefully end up becoming a top 3-round NFL draft pick. I'm super high on Carnell. Overall, the Mizzou defense did lose some important pieces, but they have plenty of depth from last year, filled a lot of those holes in the transfer portal, and should hopefully mesh under their new offensive coordinator from South Alabama. Losing Blake Baker's not great, but Mizzou's defense should be fun again. Looking towards their 2024 schedule, the Tigers ended up dodging a bit of a bullet. In Week 1, they'll play against Murray State, which will be a win, and in Week 2, they play against Buffalo, which will also be a win. Their first somewhat challenging game will come at home against Boston College, as they will have to face a super dynamic quarterback in Thomas Castellanos, and remember, Boston College is now run by Bill O'Brien. It could be a sneaky trap game, but I still think Mizzou is fine in that. I also think they're fine to beat Vanderbilt, and they will start out at 4-0 before the game that decides the season, in my opinion. They'll go on the road to play against a likely ranked Texas A&M team, and in a hostile environment against a former Big 12 rival. I think this game determines a lot. Right now, I pretty much have this at 50-50, but because of experience and momentum, I think Mizzou does end up getting the job done and gets to 5-0. After that, they have a weird game on the road against UMass, which they should win, and then they return home against Auburn. While some people think Auburn's a dark horse playoff team, as long as Peyton Thorne's the quarterback there, I'm not going to put any faith in them. And I think Mizzou wins that game pretty easily, and Auburn falls off. From there, though, the schedule gets a little bit more difficult, as they then go on the road to Alabama. This could be one of the most underrated games in the SEC, and could be a likely top 10 matchup. Say what you want about Kalen DeBoer and the future of Bama, I think the Tide will be just fine this year, and this will be a huge matchup. I don't think Mizzou ends up winning that game, and that is their first loss of the year. They'll be 7-1 at this point before they'll play against Oklahoma. One of the last times Oklahoma came to Faurot Field was the amazing upset in one of the biggest games in school history. And I don't think Oklahoma will have that kind of hype this year, but I do think they end up winning this one. I think it'll be close, and I think it'll be really fun, and Mizzou gets to 8-1. After that, they'll go on the road to South Carolina, where this honestly does worry me. Mizzou now has a decent win streak against the Gamecocks, and I don't know if South Carolina is going to want to lose this game again. While I do think Mizzou ends up winning it in the end, do not be surprised if this game goes to overtime or if the Gamecocks actually win it. That is my trap game on the roster for this year's team, and we'll really have to wait and see from there. After that, they'll go on the road to Mississippi State, as they'll get to play against the new-look Jeff Lebby Bulldogs. And once again, it does kind of feel like a late November trap game, but I think Mississippi State is really far behind talent-wise, and I'm also not really that high on Blake Shapen, so I'm not really too concerned about Mississippi State here, and I think Mizzou wins that game. After that, they'll play against Arkansas, and I'm not sure if that'll be on the Friday after Thanksgiving or the Saturday. I think it got moved. But I'm also not really that high on Arkansas. I will say, though, this is a rivalry, and Sam Pittman may be fighting for his job, so it could be closer than the experts think. But the Razorbacks lost a lot of talent, and Taylon Green is a huge work in progress for me still. So that would end up bringing Mizzou to an 11-1 regular season record, where they would definitely qualify for the college football playoff, and I'm not sure how they would mix into the SEC championship picture. I know Texas, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Georgia will also be up there, and I don't know all their schedules off the top of my head, but I think Mizzou has a top 4 finish in the SEC, and likely gets into this year's playoff near the very bottom of it. Mizzou is pouring a ton of money into the football program, and they picked the right time to get good. They have a ton of hype this year, and it really is now or never for them. The door is finally open for the Tigers to take that next step, and they absolutely have to. I think that Texas A&M game is the biggest game of the year, because if they blow that, I then don't think they have enough in them to also lose to Bama and then bounce back and win those last 4 games. If they lose to A&M, I also think they probably lose to Oklahoma and could even drop one to South Carolina. Overall, I think they'll finish between 9-3 and 11-1, but I'm going to put my official prediction in at 11-1, and we'll have to wait and see. But what do you guys think? If you're a Mizzou fan, what do you think of this year's team? What are your thoughts on my analysis? And how many games do you think they'll win? Also, if you're not a Mizzou fan, please give me a fair critique and let me know your thoughts down below, and let me know what team I should preview next. Before I go, don't forget to also leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.